Hi, good evening everyone. I am Chitrashri from MTD1. I welcome all to the Seminar 9 Sitara Seminar Series. It's my honor to introduce the speaker of the day, Ashwini Chitnis. She has extensive experience in the electricity sector, policy and regulation, and is involved in initiatives aimed at building the capacity of various stakeholders to help them better engage with the sector process. Presently, she leads the clean energy supply portfolio at WRI India, overseeing transmission planning, grid resilience, power markets, and utility economics. Our research focuses on just energy transition and long-term resource planning for a renewable energy-rich grid. I now invite ma'am to take the stage and guide us. Thank you.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. And first of all, thank you. And I'm grateful to Professor Anand and Sitara team to give me this opportunity to be here and share my experience with all of you. So, firstly, thanks for that opportunity. And as the topic says, I have a few slides here, but these slides are mostly placeholders so that I don't digress too much from whatever I want to say. And there is some structure to what I would like to share with all of you. Uh, the topic for today's discussion is very close to my heart, and I have worked in this space for more than for close to 15 years. And this space for engagement and interaction and participation has significantly changed in the last 2 decades. The fact that it existed in the first place is miraculous. Now it is rapidly shrinking. So, through this talk today, I just want you to have a glimpse of how it all started, what opportunities it created, what impacts it had, and what direction are things going today, and what we can perhaps hope and aspire for. So that's the broad contour of today's discussion. Please feel free to interrupt at any point of time, ask questions or share comments, anything. Absolutely welcome. So with that, let me go to the, yeah, where do I point this? Okay. Okay. Maybe even before that, so, oops, I'm already, what am I doing? Sorry. Can you, I'm so sorry for messing it up. Ah, okay. Okay, let it be here. I'll then. Does anyone here know? So you all must be aware of Maharashtra State Electricity Distribution Company, right? They are the ones who supply here as well. Does anyone have any idea of the annual revenue requirement of that company? Can anyone take a guess? Any idea? Even if you don't know, just take a guess. You can always hazard a guess. It doesn't have to be right. Throw any numbers. 200 crores. Yeah, yeah. Why not? I'll tell you, you're very, very short of the number. So now you can be much more ambitious. 600. Think of in multiples of thousands and hundreds. 1,30,000 crores is the approved ARR of MSC. That is called the annual revenue requirement of MSCDCL for the financial year 24-25. Okay. And this is the approved. In all probability, they'll end up spending more than that. Okay. So if just imagine 1,30,000, if you are able to do any efficiency improvements, which even reduces this costs by 2%. See, I'm sure you all are great at maths. So just think about the public savings that can come out of this. So, when I started working in the power sector, I didn't even remotely consider working on improving the efficiency of public utilities as a socially relevant work. But when I looked at the extent of the money that they spend on behalf of consumers from yours and my pockets, it's just massive. And even the smallest of efficiency gains can lead to significant savings in terms of public money that is at stake. Okay, so that's the sector we are talking about. And this is just a one distribution company in an ocean of the sector. So, of course, MSCDCL is one of the very large companies, so I shouldn't underplay that part. But the kind of money that is at stake today at the national level, the losses of distribution companies are at the scale of 6 lakh 50,000 crores. So that's the kind of money we are talking about. It is one of the most important topics that the current Finance Commission is focusing on in terms of how do we restrict these losses, how do we bail out the companies for once and not do it repeatedly as we have been doing. In fact, in 2013, we had done a paper and we had found consistently the overall losses at the national level of distribution sector are in the ballpark of 2% of GDP. That's the kind of number we are talking about. Okay, so that sort of public money is at stake. So I hope I don't miss it. Ah. So what I have here is a typical state electricity sector. And this is the current setup. Before we come here, I'll just tell you, I see so many young faces. So, electricity sector has been undergoing lot of reforms. And in the 1990s, it was one of the most sort of debated sector because to allow foreign investment, to open up the sector, and these reforms have been a very hot and debated topic in the electricity sector. And this is the structure that we have here today. You have entities that generate electricity, then the ones that transmit and distribute it. And distribution is the last and the weakest link in the sector in some sense, because it is the consumer facing link. It is the one from which is responsible for recovering all the expenditure that happens in the sector. So I'll come to that in a minute. And this entire thing of generation, transmission, and distribution is regulated by an entity called the State Electricity Regulatory Commission. So this in electricity sector, it's a concurrent subject, first of all. So which means that both state and center have role in the decision making, rule making, and policy making. There is one act, Electricity Act 2003, which is currently under amendment. There is a proposed bill and it's up for public comments. So it's a very opportune time to talk about all this. And so it's a concurrent subject. And the way it works is that certain aspects of electricity sector are the concern of only the state. So for example, what Mahavitaran or MSCDCL, as you all know, how it charges its customer is something which is of only interest to Maharashtra and no one else. But if there are generating stations which are supplying to multiple states, then it's of concern not just to Maharashtra, to multiple states. That's when the concurrent nature comes into picture. You have a central electricity regulatory commission, and each state has its own regulatory commission. There is no hierarchy. Central commission cannot dictate anything to the state commissions. They don't report to each other, nothing. It's just that they have very different jurisdictions. Anything that concerns one or more state falls under the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. Anything concerns within the state falls under the State Electricity Commission. So very clear jurisdictions are marked. And governments, the whole act was done in a way with this entity. Now, state regulators are not elected people. So they are appointed by the government through an appointment process. They have an enormous immunity. They have enormous power in terms of decision making for the sector, which has huge financial, decisions to make. And the central government has certain decision making powers. And there is a delicate balance between all of this, which has been changing as with so many other sectors in the past decade. It has always been a fraught space. It's not like in a federal system, you will always have a tug of war for power, for decision making between the center and the states. Electricity is no different, um, because ultimately where the buck is to be recovered. So, like where you have to recover money, that is where state's interest and center's interest will be very different. Tariff hikes are unpleasant in if you are a politician, and therefore you wouldn't like to see them, especially you wouldn't like to see them near any of the election cycles. Whereas as a central government, you wouldn't like to see losses in the range of GDP percentages. And that's something, so so that's a political game, right? So it doesn't matter even if you have the same party at center and state, the interests will not align because the stakes are very different for someone who is running for an election in a state vis-a-vis someone who is sitting as a minister in the central government. So this is just to keep all this background in mind. And the way the sector is structured is that when the Electricity Act was formulated, it did something very remarkable, enshrined certain provisions which have enabled very different kind of situation to it. So, so there are some very interesting provisions in the Electricity Act. So electricity is, just one of the segments in the broader energy sector. Energy sector has other fossil fuels, coal, but electricity is very different because of the act and the provisions that have been created. So first of all, the Act has mandated the regulatory commissions in terms of how they should behave. There is a much, much better and clear code of responsibilities, functions. You will not find anything equivalent to the Electricity Act in, let's say, coal. You look at the acts related to coal, there is no such sector, there is no such structure, there is no such requirement for transparency or participation. And the money involved is just as much or as high. Similarly, with railways, there is no accountability, there is no this kind of transparency. There is a different sort of transparency that comes through government's functioning, but that's different. Here, it's a sectoral act with a very clearly defined roles and requirements. So, the first important thing that the act has enshrined is mandated public process for three key things. The missions can go ahead and do much more public process, nothing stops them, but they have to mandatorily do it whenever they are granting a license, either for trading or for new okay, you don't need a license to actually be a generator in the sector anymore. Earlier that was a requirement, and that was one of the major issues and challenges with the earlier reforms. Today you need to be a wires licensee, whether it is transmission or distribution. You need a license, you need to be a license to be a trader, and any process through which the commission confers such a license has to be mandatorily a public process. Similarly, retail tariffs, our tariffs, whenever they are changed, there has to be mandatorily a public process. And when the commissions, this is a very important thing, when the commissions formulate the rules and regulations about anything, about how they are going to function, about how they are going to assess a certain thing, the rule making process itself is participatory and transparent by very mandate. So that's again very unique to electricity sector. Then there is this provision wherein the commissions can appoint entities called as consumer representatives and empower them to actually be party. In a legal context, you cannot challenge something if you're not part of the proceedings. I mean, you can theoretically file PILs later on, but if you're part of the process, it gives you entirely different sort of advantage in terms of information, in terms of the deliberations, and it's an entirely different way of engaging with process. So that provision is there. It is not mandated, but the space is created for the commission to actually appoint people to undertake this job. Then the first time, the Act has created a very streamlined consumer grievance redressal process. I will not go into the details of it. It's very important. It's unique to electricity. And there are very good safeguards that are put in to actually protect consumer interest. There is even a provision that enshrines that the certain standards of performance are not met by the commission, the regulators can impose penalties and actually, if there is load shedding, the discom owes you money. uh, except that if we were to implement it, the discoms will be even in deeper losses than they are. So we don't enforce it yet. The fact that such legal provision exists is absolutely very interesting. Um, yeah. So with just to with this background, I want to share an interesting statistic with you. And this has always been the case. Maharashtra is unique in its, let's say, zeal for consumer activism, for public participation. And we are actually, in a way, very fortunate that we have industrial associations, we have consumer groups. They are greatly invested, informed in all these processes, and they participate greatly. What you're looking at is the number of objectors who participated in the tariff process in across states. These are all big states. Like if you take Gujarat, Karnataka, they're as industrial, as big, as literate as Maharashtra. But look at the number of people who participate in the tariff process. So it's starkly different. And in Maharashtra, this has had very, very important impacts on the way the power sector has evolved. And that is precisely going to be the topic of today's discussion. So, what I'm going to do is actually walk you through why Maharashtra turned out to be a little different than others. And I'm going to walk you through three very important case studies which highlight what a well functioning commission and consumer participation can look like, what it can do, and where we are headed, like I said. So, commissions in the first place were also uh, in many states, commissions came into existence because of consumer participation. So, even before the Electricity Act of 2003, there was a 1998 Act which actually mandated that all states should establish these quasi-judicial bodies which will independently and on techno-economic analytical grounds decide tariff. And industry was very much interested in having this kind of tariff decision because are you all aware of a concept called cross subsidy? Have you heard about it? Can someone quickly explain what cross subsidy is? Would you like to? I can give you the mic if you want.
So, cross subsidy is basically when we have different rates at different levels of consumption. So, we charge lower at the initial levels and then we charge higher when your consumption goes higher and higher. So,
So it's a way of differentially pricing a thing so that in electricity's case, you basically penalize someone who consumes more and you make it easier for someone who consumes less. And the idea for that is to ensure because affordability is a challenge in a country like ours. While this makes sense in most of the times, if you are an industrial consumer, you might think that this is, making it much electricity is an important input to your industry, you will naturally not like this regime much. And industries were the ones who were actually wanted the tariff to be much more rational, to be based on cost of supply, because and they so after the 1998 Act came into picture. And state governments used to opportunistically decide tariffs whenever it was convenient to them. And so even in Maharashtra, it was an industrial association that challenged a tariff increase that government had given. And they said that with this new act, you cannot do this. You need to establish first a quasi-judicial body, and that body can only. That's how. So MERC's very genesis lies in consumer activism. They came into being because somebody challenged the government's decision to unilaterally impose tariff. And in its early days, see, whenever you create a new institutional setup in a Indian sort of a democratic and multi stakeholder system, it takes time for people to really figure out what an institution can do, how far it can go. So the initial time in which an institution comes into existence, rulemaking is very crucial because that can set the tone for how far it can go in terms of enabling governance and participation. So when MERC was actually appointed and first tariff petition, I'll not go into the details of this because I, of course, wasn't there in the sector. These are all stories that I know of through, and there are records. You can all, I'm not just making up a story. You can go and look at the first tariff order of MSCDCL and the entire thing is there recorded. The first time Mahad Vitaran that time was a entire electricity board, Maharashtra electricity board. So MSEB was not used to being asked questions about its operations in any way. So it gave a 10-page petition saying that these are my costs, these are my expenses, this is what I need. And then because there were consumer, at that time they weren't even consumer representatives. They were people who were actively tracking the sector, understood what is going on, went and asked hundreds of questions that, why are you saying this? What is the basis of this cost? Where are these details, etc., etc., etc. And that is how suddenly a Pandora's box was opened. MSCDCL first time found itself in a position where it had to provide justifications and reasons and proof and evidence, which was never the case. Even today, Coal India is a deregulated thing and it sets its own, it's a monopoly and it sets its own price. And you can go and look wherever you want. You will not find any information in terms of its efficiency, cost benefit analysis of its decisions, nothing. But in electricity sector, you will have like a entirely different level of information that is available. So all of it started with regulatory commission asking this data, empowering, in case of Maharashtra, 4 organizations to be the authorized consumer representatives. And what they did in that way is that they made these people, these 4 institutions. One can always argue, like, why these 4? Why not more? Could it have been more participatory? Absolutely, it could have been. It could have been a much better thing. But the fact that it allowed these 4 organizations also had very profound effects. And these 4 organizations were by default made party to all the proceedings before the commission. What that meant was you will get access, whoever that consumer representative is, they get access to all the petitions that are filed before the commission. Now, that's a huge information enabling act. If you look at legal issues or if you are ever to look at, the way legal things evolve, getting access to petition is the crucial thing because that tells you what is the grounds on which a certain plea is being made, what is the evidence that has been given. So if you have to question any decision right at the time that it is being made, this is the space to be in. And having access to the petition and the pleadings will put you at a very different level of understanding in terms of what's going on. And that was enabled by MERC by creating this authorized consumer representatives. And in a state like Maharashtra, which is a huge state, another remarkable thing that the commission did right from its first time is that instead of holding a public hearing in Mumbai, which is what, so MERC is in World Trade Center, so Kulaba, so it could have just held a public hearing in Mumbai or anywhere else. But it didn't. It actually decided to hold it in all the major 6 revenue headquarters of MSCDCL, Nashik, Aurangabad, Amravati, Nagpur, Navi Mumbai, Pune. So that made it possible for people to actually come in you saw that 4,400, like, and this is online. And in the earlier years, if you go, these numbers are much higher, much, much higher. So by physically going in areas and making it easier for people to participate, that was a game changer. And one would always imagine that it's not easy to engage with electricity sector. Like, in a newspaper, how many of you will go and look into an ARR related ad that is put up for public notice? Hardly anyone. When you see that thousands of people actually take effort to understand and, engage with this, tells you that how important sector is for people and for business owners and for everybody. So this myth that is created that, if something is complex, nobody will be interested. Making it participatory doesn't really have much of an impact. You clearly see a very different case in case of electricity, especially in Maharashtra. So, with this background, let me share with you 3 tops. So in the So I have been I was part of Prayas as an organization. It's a Pune-based not-for-profit research organization, and they were one of the authorized consumer representatives in Maharashtra. And I, as a part of Prayas, was the person who engaged with MERC on all of these cases. So, many of these cases. So, during this time, I want to just share with you three remarkable things that happened in Maharashtra. And I haven't seen a parallel of it in the sector for the last 17 years that I'm working in the sector. So first and the foremost is the statewide load shedding protocol. I don't even know how many of you were. Does anyone remember the load shedding that used to happen in Maharashtra in 2006, 2007? You all are so young, so I have no idea you can even remember any of this. So basically, Maharashtra at that time was reeling under, like much of the India. Okay, there's nothing unique about Maharashtra in terms of experiencing shortages. That was a countrywide phenomena. What was unique was, see, if you are a distribution company, and if you are facing a shortage, basically you have more demand than the generation you have. What will you do? Whom will you supply and whom will you not supply? Assuming basically you have to ration out. You only have so much supply and everybody wants power 24/7 ideally. Who are the people whom you will choose not to supply if you can do so? Absolutely. That is the exact thing. And in the consumer categories that are there in electricity sector, the people who give the least revenue primarily are agricultural people, because almost no revenue at that, it's highly subsidized. So if it's subsidized, you will not give them. And people from whom you feel you cannot recover your money are the second one. So the load shedding will be disproportionately felt by rural areas, peri-urban areas, on feeders that have large agricultural load. These are the first things that will be shed in the any shortage time. And in 2005-6 time, the shortages were so high that even in cities and urban areas which are otherwise protected from load shedding to a great extent, we were seeing 3-4 hours, sometimes 5 hours, 6 hours. So this load shedding protocol was a very unique thing, because first time there was a debate about how to distribute shortages, not about how to distribute power. You know there is a 5,000 megawatt shortage. How are you going to distribute it? Who is going to get more load shedding and on what basis and why? And then actually you wouldn't believe, like, this is a thing again that came up entirely through consumer activism. There were people, agricultural associations and industrial associations who challenged unilateral in basically how MSEDCL was rationing its shortages. And then after a lot of deliberations, there is a whole body of work on this. All the orders are there in the public domain. The reason that my slides are so sparse is that I can later on share a lot of reference material on this. I didn't want to clutter the slides with a lot of information. But what had happened was, this when this questioning started, there came out a framework that, losses are high, which means the MSEDCL is not able to recover its revenue. So it's a joint responsibility. You can blame the company for not actually recovering what it is due. You can even blame the society for not being, paying for what it is consuming. So how do you make this accountability thing? So a simple metrics was drawn, like wherever distribution losses, which is basically theft, is high, you will have high load shedding, and wherever it is low, you will have proportionately low load shedding. And nowhere in India you see this kind of transparency. And that meant, like, division level audits, energy audits were done to find out what are the loss levels, what is the, and at that time, you used to get in the newspaper, the way you get in a corner, weather for the day, temperature, things like that. The load shedding protocol used to appear. And that used to be, and wherever the DISCOM actually did not adhere to, people were so vigilant that cases were filed, and it was just a different sort of accountability which has never been demanded from a distribution company in terms of how it is rationing its supply and shortages. So that's one extremely, that tells you the kind of things that can happen through participatory governance. That's one thing. The second thing that happened at the same time, along with the load shedding protocol, was when the load, even after okay, initially I can feel good if someone else is suffering just as much as I am. But, there is only so much to be gotten from it. I would like to get power whether or not someone else is suffering as much. So, with that thought, and in case of Pune, Pune has a large industrial cluster, and they all, because you cannot rely on the state supplier for 24 by 7 power, they all had large diesel based generator sets, which were like their backups. And they then started saying that they were not getting as much load shedding, but the residential consumers were getting much more load shedding. And then this whole what is called the zero load shedding model came up through participatory governance sort of framework, wherein people said that, okay, why is MSEDCL not buying power? Because it's very costly and I can't increase tariffs even more than that. So that was the thing. So what if I'm willing to pay more? I mean, usually in a distribution company setup, one consumer's willingness cannot determine a larger choice or broader choice. In zero load shedding model, what emerged was certain cities wherein large public campaigns were done to actually come up with willingness to pay. If you pay, all consumers of Pune pay 50 paise more than what they are paying today, extra power can be arranged for them, and they will not get in, or maybe instead of 4 hours they will only get 1 hour of load shedding. Again, all of this had to be mitigated through very extensive public process. Other people were keeping a tab in terms of whatever extra is being paid is used only for that much, and MSEDCL is not either diverting power to these people or diverting the extra money to other. All of that accounting was transparently done. Ultimately, it had it stopped after a while for two reasons. There were, of course, accounting issues which were brought to light, and two, uh, power availability increased. As soon as power availability increased, load shedding became a non-issue. Like today, you don't see load shedding as a political issue, but this was a big issue at that time, and there the participatory model made a huge difference. The second thing that I want to discuss is, and you have Professor Zadav here. She's also worked on agricultural feeders and all this consumption quite a bit. So you might be aware that, and that is simply estimated. And how you estimate it makes a huge amount of difference in terms of whether it will be correctly estimated, overestimated, or underestimated. The rule, it is never underestimated. It is always overestimated, because that helps see, how will you calculate the distribution loss of a company? All the input energy that has come in minus the metered sales and loss, that will be the losses. Now, some loss would be technical, that cannot be avoided. But if the losses are in the range of 25%, 30%, 35%, actually technical losses cannot be so high. So whatever is remaining is theft. Now, if you want to show that your losses are less, another way of doing that is, what not all sales are metered. So some sales are estimated, and the entire estimated sale is agriculture. So if I start increasing my estimated sales, my losses will start looking smaller and smaller. And because there are performance benchmarks for me to meet as a distribution company for losses, the simplest way to meet them is to increase the agricultural sales. This has been going on forever, and not just in Maharashtra, in all states. But it is very difficult to actually, in a rigorous and scientific way, actually estimate agricultural sales. The absence of meters at even the feeder level and meters at consumer end, they don't exist at all. So that entire, then you have to make all this back calculations about horsepower capacity of the pump, underground water tables, what is the kind of cropping pattern, what is realistically possible to be pumped out, and what is the realistically possible electrical consumption. That becomes a very fraught exercise, because on all these points you will find hundreds of data which don't correlate, which don't make sense. So, so that's challenge of agricultural estimation. And for years together, in despite all sorts of norms, this simple metering, let alone consumer metering, this simple metering of feeders, so that at least at the feeder level you have a much better idea of what is the power that is supplied, was not happening. And in 20 most recent is again all these deliberations details. There are study reports, committee reports. I'll share links to it later on. They're all available on the MERC website. The most latest restatement happened in 2020, and Mahavitaran had projected that its losses are 14%, 14.46%, and this was challenged by consumers. Consumers put this was one of the very important stakeholders in Maharashtra's regulatory. He's no more. He recently passed away, Mr. Hogade. He was the one who actually painstakingly put all the evidence before the commission to challenge MSCDCL's assertion that losses are at 14%. And that led to an entire process of restatement. And from that, it emerged that the losses were actually 21%. And if you're talking about ARR in lakhs of crores, 6% revision of losses would mean anywhere between 2,500 to 3,000 crores. That is the kind of thing that you're talking about. So again, all of this was possible because of very intense, very analytical, evidence-based consumer participation. And third major area where I would like to give another, this is the last of the case studies that I would like to talk about, is to do with power purchase procurement. So the earlier simple diagram that you saw, generation, transmission, and distribution. If you were to give percentages in terms of the cost, the electricity that you pay for, 80% of the cost is for generation, and rest is all wires and distribution. So, you know, how your power purchase is planned, how it is priced, makes all the difference to your tariff and in general to the sector. And in this case, there has been a major, in 2012, there was competitive bidding that was brought into the thermal generation sector, and that led to a huge boom of, you know, how new capacity, private sector started majorly building thermal power plants. Until then, it was mostly the state-owned NTPC which was doing the power plant building things. So after the power sector, after the private sector came in, on the face of it, there was like huge reduction in costs. All the competitive bidding tariffs were like super low, and it seemed to make a lot of sense. It seemed very competitive, very economical. And that time also, it was almost too good to be true. Those were the because if it was 50 to 60% lower than what the state-owned entities charges were for similar projects. And of course, it is not to say that state-owned entities were efficient and that is the benchmark. Not at all so. Their inefficiencies were well documented, but it was not known what is possible and how much lower can you go. Alas, the, the tariffs that were discovered and that were super lucrative economically, they only remained so till the power projects started generating. When the projects came to a point where the power will actually be provided to the distribution company, they all said they cannot supply at that tariff because all costs have gone up. And the bidding was such that they were supposed to assume this fuel risk. And they actually, by saying that we can no longer assume that risk, there was a fundamental breach of contract. Now, in this case, the cases went up to Supreme Court. All along this, there was very, very active consumer participation that actually questioned this whole process. And the Supreme Court case actually ruled in the favor of the consumers in by protecting that once you have taken a risk knowingly and willingly, you cannot alter the contract. And that was a major victory. It is called the Energy Watchdog versus CERC case. If you look it up on internet, you will find the whole proceedings. And basically, it was a very landmark case because it also shows the duplicity of the private sector. In Enron's case, although the cost was extremely high, it was the private sector that was championing that you cannot break the contract. Sanctity of the contract is paramount, and you cannot just change anything. No matter how costly the power, you have to buy it. And now, when actually they wanted to change the contract because power was not as costly as they would like. So then they were like, you have to factor in realities, change in law, force measure, all kinds of arguments were brought in, which were legally not tenable, mind you. And commissions actually went ahead and gave those cost increases, but Supreme Court ruled all it back. So again, a very effective, and all this happened through channels of regulatory process and consumer activism. Actually, discoms were not even challenging this unilateral tariff increase that was sort of imposed on them. The only entities that were questioning all of this were consumer representatives. So these are just, three ideas that I wanted to put forth in terms of what can happen. And these are like very different level. One is at the level of general consumer experience in terms of how electricity supply and its availability impacts you, whereas the other two are much higher governance and economic policy related issues which affect the sector majorly. But in all of this, consumer representation had a major role to play, and they wouldn't, in some of them, wouldn't even have happened in the absence of consumer representation. So So while these are all great stories, what is the current state of affairs? And unfortunately, uh, as with any institution, it comes into existence, it does some amazing things, and there is an inevitable decline. And MERC has been no exception to this rule. uh, it has actually done away with many of its own promising practices, which have yielded very good results for the consumers. Since 2018, MERC actually passed a resolution. By, Currently, there are no authorized representatives before MERC. With all this history of excellent participation, they stopped having consumer representatives empaneled as a part of their process. In 2018, in a remarkable decision, they actually went and passed a resolution to stop all the audio visual recording of their public hearings. Not just that, but to destroy all the existing recordings. Apparently, the reason given was to actually cost cutting measures, which just baffles you that why would you destroy exist? There is no costs to be achieved from that. In fact, I would imagine you will incur some cost to destroy them, but never the. And this case is still again. This was challenged. Maharashtra continues to be. Problem is, it becomes very litigious. Like this action of MERC has been challenged. Even today, it is up before Bombay High Court. And in fact, the most recent development, as I was researching for this presentation, I found out that consumer representatives have, of course, challenged this. And there was a stay put on by Mumbai High Court against this destruction. But before the stay could be made, a lot of destruction anyway happened. That's one part of the story. The second development is that actually people said that individuals who were the commission chairperson and members at the time this decision was taken should be made party to the proceedings. And MERC as an institution was opposing this development because they said that that was tantamount to initiating criminal proceedings against these individuals. But High Court actually weighed in on the consumer demand and actually has directed to party to the case. There is no yet a verdict on this issue. And nowadays, if I there are still pros, and so some vestiges of an earlier era do remain. So for example, Maharashtra is perhaps one of the few states that has all its hearings online accessible. So you can, as a public person, you can just go and participate in a hearing in the sense of witnessing it happen. If you want to participate in the sense of impediment, that is still a difficult issue, and that has been made more legalistic. Uh, and even in public hearings, now, unlike what MERC used to do in the old days, where it used to go in 6 different cities, hold public hearings for days together, sometimes for 2 days, if in the same day everybody could not get an opportunity to speak. Now they hold it 6 times, but all are online, and it is such a mechanical thing. Like there's almost like a buzzer, like you have to speak only for 3 minutes. Whatever you have to say it in 3 minutes. You cannot repeat if you have given a written submission, which you have to if you want your submission to come on record. You cannot speak more than what you have said. You cannot repeat. There's like crazy number of, basically it is being made into a almost a pointless exercise to some extent, in my view, because a true meaningful participation cannot be so restrictive of the rights of the person who is participating and wanting to put their views on the table. So that's again a very sad development in the current times. So yeah, so as you see that inevitably there is some decline that has set in, but uh, yeah, I don't want to end on a very sad and gloomy note, simply because what i what I would take away from all these case studies, experience, and even my own personal experience of having worked with the commission is that I think the most fantastic thing about electricity sector is that it could demonstrate that consumer participation. Yeah, please. Oh, 5 minutes. Sorry. I'm done. I'm just capturing the initial. So basically, it has demonstrated that you can have very meaningful and effective impact on the process and outcomes, even in a very technocratic sector like electricity. And that's just amazing. Just imagine the opportunities that can be leveraged in other sectors which are more accessible to consumer participation. And it has made, actually, if it is often blamed, consumer participation is blamed that it takes time, it is more cumbersome, you want efficient and quick and one window things and everything like that, you want to do everything as soon as you can. Actually, it is public participation which gives credibility, strength, and actually brings in rigor, and wherein you can have some meaningful long lasting impacts. And this is despite the challenges, like very limited awareness is there, very little investments go, if at all. Like if think about it, like someone like Prayas, or someone like a person who is working in a consumer group, what is their salary, what is the investment that is going on, that they are putting full days work into this, and taking up this matters of public interest. It's paltry, it's nothing. Like if the sector even puts 0.05% of the ARR into consumer, it will be huge, it will be a huge sort of a investment in terms of public interest. And lastly, this is my last slide. Basically, I just want to end on this note that right now, as I said in the beginning, Electricity Act is being amended, and it's put out for public comments. For any of you who are interested, you go on Ministry of Power's website. There is a public thing asking for comments. And there are some provisions in the current amendment which actually are quite, I would say, which are not in the spirit of regulatory governance, that they stifle the independence and autonomy of the commission by making it easy for the state government or the central government to remove chairpersons or members. And that takes away, and the clauses that are put are quite vague, just because somebody is not acting according to the policies. Now that's such a vague wording. Like, who decides someone is acting? And you have a redressal mechanism. If you have a redressal mechanism, if I'm not, let's say a commission is not acting, I think that will show up in its order, and that order can be challenged in a legal forum. Why do you want to give this kind of a control to the state agency to actually remove a commission member or a chairperson on such grounds which are very difficult to prove? So I feel we need to really take this amendment seriously. We need to safeguard the institution's credibility and autonomy to the extent possible. In a concurrent subject like electricity, it is extremely crucial that we reach some kind of an understanding. If so long as there will be there is all the dynamics is given. I'm not challenging the dynamics because it's essential also, but it has to play out in a way that respects the state and center's respective roles and autonomy, and doesn't breach it in a way that makes it subjective and susceptible to misuse. That's how I can put it. So yeah, so I would like to end on that note. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think that was really interesting. And I'm tempted to say that this seems to be a representation of what's happening to institutions across the board in India today. collapsing institutions, lack of regulation or lack of accountability. But thank you. It's so interesting. So many nuances. In the hope that there will be some questions.
Yeah.
We just have the mic. Just wait for the mic to come. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Adya from MTech first year, Sitara. I just wanted to know that for the consumer participation in the tariff processes for the financial year 24 to 25, we observed that Maharashtra has a lot of participation as compared to the other states. Could you tell us why that is the case?
Okay. Sure. Maybe I'll, if there are more questions, I can
Get
take.
up.
Yeah.
Anybody? Or we can pass the mic to side.
Do you want to pass this? Will that be easier? Acha.
Hello, my name is Pratik Joshi. I'm PhD student at Ashang Desai Center for Policy Studies. So my question is, ideally we expect that regulatory commissions in this case should function at arm's length with the government, state government. But practically, the appointment of chairman itself is a political decision. So do you have any experience of how has been the relationship between, especially in case of Maharashtra, how has been the relationship between state government and MERC, and has MERC taken any stand? We're talking about institutions, which was maybe championed by the consumers or maybe put forward by the consumers, and has there been any what kind of relationship it has been with state when it comes to MERC?
Excellent. I'll. Yes.
Anyone else? If I can ask a direct question, so this is the story of Maharashtra.
Yes.
Is it exceptional in the Indian context, or there are similar stories with regulatory commissions and in the operations in say other states? Are other states so active? Are consumers active? Or Maharashtra is a real standout? And if so, like partly to add to Adya's question, why?
Yeah. Okay. So, so on your question, I would say that I'm not as well informed at the moment as I was a few years ago. But I'll, with that caveat, I will answer that my information and knowledge could be little dated. So on your question, it's hard to pinpoint because in that sense I'm not a social scientist and I've not studied this from that sort of. But I'll share with you my understanding as a person who was interacting with these processes and the people concerned. What I find remarkable in Maharashtra is that, there is a lot of uh, ground level bodies that are connected and who, so for example, if I were to do an intervention in Maharashtra and I want to tell people about it, I need to tap into only, let's say, 15, 20 people. And the information networks are really well spread out. So a huge number of consumer organizations, they are very active. Industrial, small industrial organizations, very active. So, and they are well clued into these processes. So while the numbers that you saw, thousands has been like 10,000s are, it's been a common way in Maharashtra. That is because of this well connected, well informed, and I would say concerned and sympathetic civil society that exists. Another example I'll give you that in Maharashtra, there was this, we did this specific thing that there is a BPL tariff for people who consume just, and electricity BPL is not the social BPL. The definition of electricity BPL is you consume less than 30 units per month. So if that is the consumption, the BPL tariff was based on monthly consumption. And during the, if any time you consume more than 30 units, you go out of that bracket and then you are charged at whatever is the 0 to 100 wala tariff, which is significantly high, double. Then we had to challenge this and say that, make it average of the year, not of a particular month. Consumer organizations got together and 27,000 submissions were made to MERC demanding this change. So I feel the credit lies to this very what in Marathi you would call Sajak and Jagruk kind of consumer groups, and uh, and that network that exists that one can tap into, because industries are active cross states, because they have a skin in the game in a very big way that a BPL consumer, even if they want, cannot on their own. But Maharashtra's, my understanding is this, that you have this critical mass of people who understand, who are well informed, and who engage, which is perhaps not there in others. Just I'll, in a related note, I will. So other states also have done some very remarkable things. So Maharashtra is perhaps will stand out in the consistency over a long period of time that it held on to this commitment to, let's say, consumer participation and public process. Certainly not alone. And in fact, it's strangely, like, a state like Odisha, had, where the Electricity Commission came in first, because of the privatization that happened in Odisha. They had some very remarkable provisions in terms of that will facilitate and further consumer participation. But it's a state wherein, 20% was only electrified till 2012. So, and, unfortunately, I feel that should have been more of the thrust, to get electricity to more households rather than having really state of the art consumer participation in the regulatory proceedings, because people don't have power. So why will, it's an irony of sorts. But that doesn't take away from the fact that they were really putting out very good provisions in terms of participation, transparency, and similar things have happened across states. Andhra Pradesh at one point of time was quite a leading state in terms of its both consumer organizations that were, they used to put out an alternate sort of plan to what the state board is doing, and very active civil society. So states have gone through these phases wherein either the commission or the civil society has been quite. I think the Maharashtra's distinction is only that they could hold on to both sides for a pretty long time. That is the perhaps, I would say, yeah, unique feature. Hmm. And your question, yes. So I would give you some. So you're absolutely right, and that's what I meant by the, when you start a new organizations, you really don't know the uh, potential and the ways in which it can either be a pain or can, lead to different kind of outcomes. So the tradition has set in Maharashtra. So what happens with all this, again, bureaucratic processes and the hierarchies that are set in, if you appoint an ex chief secretary as the commission chairperson, next time, if you appoint somebody who is lesser in rank than that, then uske baad you cannot go back to appointing a chief secretary, because they will not take that position. So Maharashtra has had this tradition wherein almost always the chairperson is of, that sort of, yeah. And there have been, so it, as with all bureaucratic institutions, there is a combination, like they, in on paper a commission is independent of the government. In practice, exercising that independence will always be a challenge and a tricky thing. Maharashtra has done it in two very remarkable incidents. Once, before an election, free power was actually made as an election promise. And remarkably, MERC at that time made the government actually spell out what will be the subsidy and make upfront payment. That is a clause in Electricity Act, by the way. Because of the fact that electricity tariffs are used as a political tool, the act requires that if you are making any upfront free power related, so that was called, the government was called out on that front once. That is one thing. Another very remarkable thing that we talked about agricultural feeders, and they had this separation. So there are, in engineering way, you can separate it in two ways. One is what is called as single phasing, and one is wherein you actually duplicate the infrastructure, wherein one feeder goes to the Gauthan and one feeder goes to the agricultural thing. So this actual physical separation is a more cleaner way of doing it, although it costs you more, and it's safer for the consumers also. Single phasing, on the other hand, can do the job, but is not a good way of doing it, and it has multiple hazards. So when these two alternatives were put, Government wanted single phasing to go ahead. They already had contracts for transformers to be bought for this project. And actually, MERC came out and said that no, you cannot do this. This is not a good solution. The government insisted on doing it. MERC said, you go ahead and do it from your own pocket. I will not allow for this expense to be actually recovered through consumer tariff. These are two very bold instances wherein MERC stood its ground against the government of the day. Yeah.
Um, yeah, good evening. My name is Kishore Seshadri. I'm from electrical engineering department. So I have a question regarding the discom. We need to pay the discom when we go for any free source of power, right? Open access power. So what if I'm just portraying a case scenario, like if I have if I want to go for a power supply at a very remote location, and I'm claiming that that power supply will provide power supply for that location until the time that the grid arrives. So in that case, how does the policy works right now? And like
You are who in this? You are the supplier
yeah, I'm this
or you're a consumer?
I'm installing a power supply.
So you are the generator.
Yeah, I'm the
Basically, you
generator.
want
Yeah,
to give the supply,
a small power supply unit,
microgrid or mini grid.
microgrid.
Okay.
So if I place it in one remote location,
Right.
and I'm claiming that that the power grid until the time the power grid comes to that location, this power supply will be a standby
Right.
option to that.
Got it.
And in that case, is there still an involvement or an agreement with the discom? Uh, and how does the system work in this?
See, if you're off grid, as in the discom has not reached that
Yeah.
point, then there is nothing with the discom. It is with the users, the community for whom you are building the microgrid. It's an agreement between you and those people. And there are schemes. So all governments, state governments as well as national government have schemes which will because as you can imagine, microgrids are extremely expensive for the user. So as a city dweller, you'll pay 4 rupees, 5 rupees, whereas a microgrid 25 rupees,
Yeah,
30
yeah.
rupees. So there are schemes which subsidize that, and that's so basically it's between you and the users unless you
yeah.
interact with the grid. The moment the grid reaches there, then it opens up many different possibilities, regulatory
So the
challenges.
my understanding is that the part where you have to pay the discom is comes in when they are already a part of the discom and they are
And you
using
use wires. See, open access is to the wires, right?
okay.
So it is like the power can come from anyone, but you are using the network of the discom. That is when the discoms, and that then you'll need an NOC from the discom, which allows you to use other generator from the suppliers it has contracted. But if discom has not reached there, then none of this comes into picture. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Let them ask.
Next with you, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Ashwini. That was a really interesting talk. So I was just, you talked about consumer participation and Prayas Energy Group and Thane Belapur, etc. They've really done an amazing job. And I was reading this paper which says that one of the reasons consumer participation in Maharashtra succeeded is because of the presence of these 3-4 organizations which played a key role. So my question or the point that I wanted to put forward is that while this is important to put the pressure on or to bring out this transparency, etc., there's not enough planning that happens in our systems anywhere, including energy sector. And especially the energy sector has such a long horizon of, you're stuck with whatever decision you make. So, unless we have, like, one of the reasons I feel like it's so, like, a system like this is fragile, like, that it can fall whenever the government decides that it can reduce because government pressure, etc. That you need more involvement from people across, like institutions, say academic institutions, just because where I'm coming from,
Yeah.
in the planning part. And I mean, regardless of what they do, like there needs to be more focus on planning from the government side and from the utility side.
Yeah.
So where is that? Like, I don't see that in in any of the discussions, that doesn't really come out in.
Right. I would, unless you want to take another. No, my response to that is that, academia shouldn't be seen as when I talked about consumer representatives, I didn't mean from a narrow point of view of people who engage with the system simply from the point of view of tariff related relationship. I didn't mean that. What I meant was there needs to be that space for participation, because especially with academic institutes or anybody who is expert, so to say, you want transparency. You want the space to question experts, or at least transparency, not necessarily question in the sense of, I'm not coming with a bias or assumption that it needs to. What I mean is that they shouldn't become closed circles in themselves. Like, because I am doing something with IIT, then it is foolproof, nothing needs to be questioned about it, shouldn't be the approach to any public policy process. And therefore transparency and participation is very important, so that all stakeholders are held accountable. And I feel once you create that space, it is for academic institutes to actually start using those spaces. See, all these years, there have been selective, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying about any particular institute or any particular entity. What I'm trying to say is that the aspiration and goal should be opening it for public participation. And academic institutes should make full use of it to bring in rigor, to bring in a scientific approach to planning. If you make it the other way around, that you and start involving experts in the planning, which is what has always happened in India, that is not at all new. You go back to even 20, 50 years, you will always have experts on groups, and planning commission did it all the time. But that doesn't necessarily lead to a robust process which allows for scrutiny, which puts the data out in the public domain, and takes care of the I suppose concern you are raising, that whether it has the planning has been done well. That will not be addressed by only expert and technocratic interventions. That's my view.
But this very little planning happen, in the sense that now this current targets of renewable energy, where's the even basic analysis for why this is a good number? Everyone knows this is going to lead to a huge problem.
Right.
There's zero analysis. I haven't seen any reports out
Yeah.
there.
Yes, I would qualify it by saying that that is not in the public domain, because, certainly. So, for example, I'll give you like in transmission. Now, currently I'm working in transmission. It's again even more technocratic than distribution and generation, because, you don't, it's so much based on modeling studies, on things which even researchers of different faculties will find hard to understand what's going on. So, for let alone a layperson. So, but that's the point. Now we'll have to open up that space and make it accessible. Just because it's not accessible, I would not say it doesn't exist. I would need a way to understand and engage with it, and that has not been done enough. I don't know if I can make a statement that it doesn't exist.
But if I ask you, like you're in the know with, is there a report that has analysis, has MECDCL, MERC, anyone done an analysis on what should be the renewable, contribution and why? I mean, where's that
yeah,
analysis?
lots of analysis is happening. That is very much, in fact, in the last 5-10 years, in fact, modeling has become a very, very big and essential component of all planning in electricity sector. I think where the challenge lies is who is doing the modeling, what are the assumptions, whether you're putting it out, because, modeling.
No, I'm not talking about anyone. People are doing modeling.
No, utilities are doing a lot of modeling, I'm saying, and they are using that as a justification, but they are not.
So should that not be presented in these orders and cases?
They only, that's precisely the challenge I'm talking about. So they say that this has been done based on a modeling study. But what that modeling study was, what were its assumptions, what were its input, they all need to be in the public domain so that one can comment on it. So that's the point. That yeah,
Because I haven't seen, I mean, in the past
they are
decisions
not
for,
there. They are
say,
not there
even
in
for
the public domain.
HVDS, no, but even for, say, when they took out HVDS, if you look at the government resolution, right, it's completely irrational and illogical, the reasoning they've given. And if you look at if you do the numbers which we've done, they don't make any sense. So this is why I really question whether they have done any sane planning or analysis.
Hi. So thanks a lot. I really enjoyed. So one quick question, maybe add on to what Professor Priya was asking. What are other areas you feel where the consumer participation is required but still has not happened? Especially when now the consumers are becoming prosumers and they are having their own generation at probably at their own place. So where really intervention is required? That is first question. And other is, I'm sure you might have seen the Maharashtra is one of those states where there's other transition from MACB to this trifurcation and generation, transmission, distribution.
Right.
What is your experience? Has that impacted somewhere in all this process? Because at least from the even the employee side also, I had a lot of stories where people used to say कि पहले जो था वो अच्छा था. We suffered a lot. So, are there any stories with you like that?
Okay, now that's a very subjective thing to. Uh, it's hard to take a view on that. See, because it's a mixed bag. I mean, I there is neither an objective data to show that this unbundling has led to any explicit efficiency improvements. To my knowledge, at least, there is no such study which shows. Having said that, it will also be a stretch to say that what was there was great, because indeed there were many challenges with, and some of those challenges have come to fore because of unbundling. They not necessarily have got resolved because of unbundling. To that extent, it might have helped. But even this, all this unbundling is also very superficial. It's all still very much I mean, you were even before, I would imagine, unbundling, people were not doing everything in the sector. Like people who were in distribution were working in distribution, people who were in because there are specializations within the vertical utility also. It's not like one engineer does everything anyway, or you transfer to every department. That's not how technocratic spaces work in any case. Specializations were always there. And much of the bifurcation is also superficial in some sense, because entities, for example, private entities, while in Reliance and Tata, and they may, but there the accounting separation has also not happened for the longest time, which is very important. From the even in Electricity Act, when they did this scheme, the major important thing is, because if you are going to make distribution collect all the revenue for everybody, there has to be a very neat and clean separation of accounts. And that has been a financial aspects, and financial governance has been a challenge, because operational separation is simple, and that anyway existed in the SEBs also. So that's one response to your. Apart from that, people do think that I mean, maybe you didn't say this, let me say it, that the major challenge that people thought, or major grouse that people had with all this was, this is done to enable privatization of generation. That is the only reason, because otherwise, why would you unbundle? And there, obviously, that is the case. And that's a much bigger topic of discussion, I think, much beyond this, because I don't want to, make any loose statements about this, because it has to be backed with techno-economic analysis, rationale in terms of what benefits and what the costs were. So at a very high level, that assert, I don't know what term to use, allegation, whatever, that observation is correct, that the unbundling was done to enable privatization. Whether privatization has resulted in its objective or not is it's a very vast question. I am afraid I may not be able to tackle that.
Yeah. And my other quick question was, where do you see the opportunity like for a more consumer participation?
Yeah, so there are many opportunities, I would feel. As you said correctly, this whole space of, with green energy coming along, and especially in people who can afford it, what could be the different ways in which would you like to have a different aggregator models? Do you want to really see only people with rooftops shouldn't be having this opportunity to more reliable electricity? So there different kind of consumer participation can come, consumer activism can come into play, especially for rural areas, for public services in rural areas. You could think of rooftop solars in a very different way if one takes it up as that issue. Safety is very big concern. Electricity sector is one of the highest in terms of people suffering from accidents and deaths, animal and human beings both. So safety related awareness is a very big issue, and that can be taken up in a very big way. And the area that I am currently working on and where I feel strongly about is the entire transmission planning. Again, huge public money at 10 lakh crores is the spread for 2032. That's the kind of expenditure that is being planned. So huge opportunities for efficiency improvements and better public spending. So, yeah.
Hi, ma'am. I'm Prathamesh. I'm a PhD student. My question is about in recent time, it has been seen that a lot of contestation is happening about this prepaid smart electricity meters, especially at the residential consumers. So, and before the Vidhan Sabha elections, there were a statement that there would not be any deployment of these meters. But immediately after the elections, the deployment happened in many of the cities. Then there were massive protests across different cities in Maharashtra. And again, then the power minister said that there will not be any deployment. There are lots of consumer organizations involved in this, and still it's not a very clear thing that whether these prepaid meters would definitely be beneficial for the sector or not, or for the consumers, or whom they are beneficial actually. uh, Maybe the contractors or maybe someone else. So this issue is still in contestation. How do you see consumers participation or role of MERC in this?
Yeah. So again, a very so whom will benefit Discom primarily, because you are taking away the burden of upfront payment is happening, right? So it's like a prepaid mobile thing. So by revenue, cash flows, the argument in favor of this thing is that my cash flows improve significantly if, as a Discom, I put prepaid meters. The other side of it is that how harsh will be the disconnection. Like, the moment I run out of my balance, it's a different thing to not be able to use your mobile for a couple of days, and it's entirely different to not have electricity for a couple of days. So what are the safeguards there, and then of course this is where you're talking about actually there are malfunctioning of meters is an entirely different area, and tampering of it equally. So you can't just talk about one side and not the other. So with all these gamut of issues, you have to, and this is what we have repeatedly said before MERC also, that one has to go very carefully, if at all, in this area. And the only safeguard to my mind is that give much longer rope to the consumer so that you don't disconnect. Even if the revenue loss is there, I think that's an easier thing to deal with. But leaving households without access to electricity is a not an acceptable thing. Just for the so that needs to be balanced out. Now, what is that? Whether it is 1 week, 2 days, 4 days, 5 days, how do you decide that? How do you make sure that that is enough for a family to actually make it if they are disconnected or if they have run out of the balance? These are all like very tricky issues which have to be dealt with. Again, credibility will exceptionally help if you do it in a transparent and participatory way, because these things by their very nature arouse suspicion. Okay, like you said, with this timing of it, the who is the meter manufacturer, who are the contracts going to, all these things come into the newspapers. None of it helps the credibility of even a well-intentioned exercise. And if you don't have credibility, if you don't have participation and transparency, it's going to lead to even more distrust amongst the people. So, yeah, so I would see more from that point of view, building trust and credibility, if at all your intentions can then take where the stated objectives at least can be met.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Yashashri. I'm also a PhD student at Sitara. I'm not from Maharashtra, so this is just a curious kind of question because we are talking about credibility and trust. So from the other side, because I come from Gujarat and theft is a huge kind of component in discom, and my father was a vigilance officer, so that's why, I wanted to know that how, because you were part of consumer representation, so how that kind of plays a role, especially in the agrarian sector, where and in peak seasons where there are a lot of load shedding cases as well. So, is there a does that weigh in a lot in consumer participation, or it hasn't been a concern yet?
Sorry, I didn't get the question entirely. So who's you can
And
just read
theft in terms of, yeah. So
Uh,
especially when there are peak agrarian seasons,
hmm,
there is a hike seen, and even in industrial sites, there's a hike in theft.
right.
Yeah, and how does that kind of uh, contribute to negotiations of tariffs, especially if there is a kind of accountability from the consumer participation, and that if you are asking for subsidies or if you are asking for, and that's also a major discussion happening right now. So how does kind of trends in theft in a particular, say, region contribute to that negotiation? Because when we are talking about public participation, and then there is a limitation of, say, how do you communicate your concerns and all of those things. So from point of consumer credibility, does theft play a role essentially?
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay, the way it plays out in the power sector is that you will sorry, you will participate as a mostly see whether I pay my bill or not is an information not privy to the commission or the discom when I intervene in a process, right? So that is not known when you are asking the distribution company questions. What is known is what are the distribution companies' losses. So individuals could be indulging in theft and demanding more accountability from discom. Process will be blind to it, it wouldn't know such a thing. But what will usually play out is that the people who come and engage with these processes usually have ground level credibility in their areas or in their, and so 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 that wouldn't come into this picture in that sense. In Maharashtra, or in, if you look at it from a state electricity regulatory commission's point of view, the largest challenge for the longest time has been for discom to be actually transparent in which areas there is theft. See, because wherever theft happens, it happens in, I mean, there is some understanding with the discom. You can't steal without the discom not knowing it. So, so at the ground level, what is the governance challenge is very different, and it's uncovering that is the bigger regulatory challenge. So, the dynamic that you are talking about doesn't really play out in that way in this context. If I understood your question correctly,
I was just concerned, like when in terms of negotiation, like when the actual public participation happens, does this kind of scenario play out?
no, not really. See, also the negotiation in the public context is also in the form of sort of, you can say what you feel like and you justify it with the evidence you think is appropriate. All entities do that. And the commission actually listens to everything and is supposed to come out with a reasoned order which sort of assimilates all these things and puts its head together in terms of deciding what's the best way of doing it, which is, of course, then up for challenge if people don't feel that their, whatever they have submitted has not adequately represented or adequately dealt with, then you have a legal recourse. So it's a that sort of a process. So the commission may talk about responsibility of consumers in a very general sense, but it's not really a part of the negotiation in any way.
I was specifically like wanting to know about meter tampering, because that has been like a,
Oh yeah, that is but that is dealt with through legal regulations. That it in fact the Electricity Act, while it created, I talked about the enabling provisions. There are some very sort of disabling provisions also. So there, the electricity theft related laws are pretty stringent and strict. In fact, in the amendment, it's a good thing that they're going to put some boundaries in terms of how much damage can be claimed and how the inspectorate can be. So there are laws for that, and that's dealt with through that.
And the last question, actually, if I might ask on a personal note, if you can share with us a little bit of your uh, personal journey as a professional, as a person reaching where you are. Because I'm quite sure there must be very interesting decisions you've made and interesting tracks. So, as a career, as a profession, it's something that many of us don't know about, but which affects all our lives. Perhaps if you can share a bit of some of the more interesting parts, or the many interesting parts, or whatever is, it briefly if you can tell us. Are you an engineer?
Yes, I am. Although I don't know, I'm more like a fake engineer, maybe because I've never worked like an engineer. So that's a good. That's a.
Are you still an engineer?
So yeah, I can start with that confession that I'm a fuzzy engineer. I have done electrical engineering, but I have never in my life worked as an electrical engineer. I very much wanted to, but somehow luck had it that I ended up in IT service industry, and that's where I worked for 6 years. And it was, I mean, although I was on the top of the world when I got into IT service industry, but then I soon learned to crib about it and everything, and got very much bored of my job also. And after a point, after 6 years, I just decided that I can't do this anymore. So that's when I wanted to try something else. And quite by a lucky coincidence, I just came to know about Prayas. Prayas at that time was also a very small and niche kind of group, and uh, they also. I mean, I had I had no idea of anything related to regulatory. I didn't even know Maharashtra had a regulatory commission. So I just saw that, some electricity bill comes, there is an ayog, and I had no understanding whatsoever of what was going on in the electricity sector, and had never caught my fancy. So then I just happened to walk into their office. They said, "We are doing this. If you want to try, you can do this." We just discussed some ideas, and the reason I had left IT was to do something which I thought would be socially relevant and meaningful. I didn't imagine working on electricity sector regulation and governance qualifies as that. So, and couldn't see any connection. And initially it was a challenge, because when I read the petitions and ARRs, I thought everything MSCDCL says makes so much sense. They have given so much data, they've given so much information. Like, what's the problem? Only then when I started, I got a lot of help from my colleagues at Prayas and other sector experts by virtue of participating in MERC. And then once you start digging deeper, as with any subject, I'm sure you all have experience with one such area and subject, it starts becoming interesting. You start seeing the nuances, you start seeing the stories that are not told, and that's how it starts becoming interesting. So I guess that's what happened in my case also.
Hearing thoughts of somebody else. So, anything else you want to say now? That you might have wanted to say, I've forgotten a couple of minutes, you put that up. Or you suddenly feel you should tell us.
No, nothing that comes right now. I'm completely blank. So that's all I can say.
On that note, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're here largely because of Omkar and partly because of Anand, and not the other way around. Yeah, correct. So there's a little token of our appreciation. There's a small handwoven staff from an organization in Andhra Pradesh.
Oh, wow.
So, Omkar, please. Thank you so much, Akhil.
Thank you so much for having me.
So in that way, she is my super senior from where I did my post graduation. She is the alumnus of the same department. She did a BTech from me. And there is a lot of appreciation in our department for her. In that way, my senior colleagues deliberately told me to follow her if you really want to do something different.